Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the latest episode of How to Build a Game Studio. I am Trevor Oz, and I'm joined today by Genevieve Gamble.
Hello.
Hello, Genevieve.
Hi.
You are on the podcast. We talk about you.
I'm excited. Long time listener, first time interviewee.
First time caller.
Exactly.
Well, now that this is a call-in show, and we're definitely not in person.
Definitely not.
Because doing it in person is just weird.
It is a little weird.
It's unnatural.
It's a little weird.
It's unnatural. I mean, if you want, I can go in the other room. We can Skype call this.
That might be more normal, yeah.
Normalize it just a little bit, just a tad.
I think we can make it work.
Okay, all right. So Genevieve, you used to be in the games industry.
I did.
You did. So what? Well, let's go on a path. So before you were in games, did you ever want to be in games?
I did. I think I remember when I was in elementary school watching a show on TV where people were game testers, and I thought that was the coolest thing in the world, and I wanted to be a game tester. I think actually Kent, I remember in his journey, also thought he wanted to be a game tester. Yeah. I think until we both realized what that meant, and I actually do not have the skill set at all to be a game tester, but I had it in my head pretty early on, but then I didn't actually think it was something I could do, especially because I'm not an artist or an engineer. So I kind of put that out of my head for a long time.
That's where I sit.
Yeah. And then later I realized that there was a bunch of other things you could do. So
yeah, there's a ton of other ways to get into it. So on this journey, you decide, hey, I'm going to go to school. So where do you start? Where do you go to school?
Yeah, so I thought I wanted to be an engineer, and I ended up going to MIT. And then I decided I did not want to be an engineer. And then I did the degree where I could do the most different number of things. So that for me was brain and cognitive science, where I could do chemistry and biology and physics, and then also you got to take a fair number of electives. And I remember I had finished my degree requirements at the end of my junior year, and I was debating whether I should just graduate early, and my parents were helping me pay for a lot of college, so I kind of asked them, like, should I graduate early? Mm-hmm. Stop paying for this. Yeah. And my mom actually encouraged me to take some more electives, and she said, well, why don't you take a class in something you really like? And I was like what, video games? And it turns out that MIT does have like a studying video games class.
Yeah, your mom was smart, man.
Yeah, my mom was very smart. So that's I ended up taking a class in the study of video games, and then there was a summer program that kind of led from that, where I ended up doing a summer program at MIT where you made games, and they were like experimental games, and I got to be a producer / designer and made my first game, which was, the original one was called Pax Pox. It was a live action role-playing game at the first PAX East.
Nice. And
that was my first game, and then my first digital game through that program was based on the Sophocles plays, I think, if I'm remembering right. And so we took two Greek plays and turned them into video games, which was a really weird start, but It was a really cool experience.
It's interesting. So from there, at that point, because you're getting your degree, mm-hmm. Did you think that you were going to take that degree and apply it to games, or were you just looking in general in tech?
When I was in school, mostly, I figured I would do something like consulting, which is actually what I ended up doing out of school. Yeah. But and that summer program was like at the very end, so I was really hopeful. So I applied to probably every studio I recognized. Definitely applied to Activision. Boston had a bunch of different game studios at the time, so I applied to all of them, and I got rejected from 100% of them. So yeah, I wanted to work in games, but
games did not want
they did
you
not
to
want
work
me.
there.
No, they were not super interested in me at that point. So instead, I went with like the safe route and ended up doing consulting for pharmaceutical companies, which was
it's very different from video games.
Pretty different, although it ended up being actually pretty useful in the long run, but also not my cup of tea, so that didn't last.
So what did you learn from that pharmaceuticals company that you feel that you could apply later to games?
Yeah, well, spoiler alert, I was a user researcher in games for 5-6 years. And a lot of the things I learned in consulting were about being able to put together a research project from start to scratch. It was a different kind of research, but being able, some of the more boring parts of my job involve like putting together PowerPoint presentations and being really good in Excel. And like to this day, I learned a lot about being really fast in Excel and PowerPoint. Super useful.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of those skills are actually useful like wherever you go.
Yeah, it's
regardless.
true.
So,
and I think this is not what I expect to be talking about, but people undervalue like what it means to actually be good at the Office products. Yeah. And if you're actually good at them, like if you've actually been trained and know what you're doing, you can save a lot of time. But I think people think that like expert means you know how to use them, right?
Like,
there's a big difference.
Expert, like, oh, I know how to do like F8 plus F8 in this formula and plug it in. But no, I mean, those programs do a ton more stuff that even I'm not versed on, at least in Excel.
Like, I had friends who were consultants for like 5 or 6 years, and like they don't have to ever touch a mouse ever when they use Excel. It's crazy. Yeah.
That sounds insane to me.
It is. It's a lot of your life gone, but you get really good at it.
So you're doing your consulting at a pharmaceutical company.
Yeah.
How do games find you?
Yeah. So I told everybody I knew that I wanted to work in games.
Yeah.
And I think having been in that summer program at least helped. Like I knew the folks like who worked at a couple indie studios, one of which Kent later went to work at. And I was part of like Social Boston Frisbee League in Boston, and just anybody I could tell I was like really like to be in games. I was in this program. I can be a producer, and eventually some small studio in the area was looking for an entry-level associate producer, really small studio, and a friend that I had met through Boston Frisbee, Logan. I don't know if Logan listens to it. If you do, hi. Logan, mentioned, hey, my studio is hiring an associate producer. Do you want to come interview? And I was like, yes, absolutely. And I'd only even been at my job for 6 months, but I was so desperate to not be in that job. And
please, games, take me.
Anything. They could have offered me like, a front desk position. I think I did apply for front desk positions at a lot of places. So, yeah, I interviewed. I don't know why, but they hired me. And
what company was this?
This was Imagine Engine, which was actually where Kent and I met, because he had been in a software engineer programmer there for a couple years at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, they apparently desperately needed somebody, so they hired me, and then and that was pretty much from there. As with a lot of people's stories, like once you get in to the industry, you make a lot of contacts, and then that kind of helped me kind of get a leg into the industry from there.
So for those that don't know, what does a producer do?
It's a good question. I remember there's a book. I later did a graduate program. And there's this like really classic book called The Game Design Workshop, or I think by Tracy Fullerton. And she explains in there that like a producer is kind of the people who make the show run, right? And that can be anything. It can be from ordering pizza to making sure the door's open and unlocked so people can get in the morning. That's kind of like the most unglamorous part of being a producer,
right.
And especially when you're an associate producer starting out. But I would say like high level, the producer is the one who's responsible for seeing the whole picture. Because if you're an engineer, you're really meant to be focusing on what you're trying to do. I mean, you still want to see how it connects to everything else, but the producer is the one who's thinking 2 months ahead, 6 months ahead, sometimes years ahead, to how you're going to get to this thing shipping and getting out the door and making players happy. So whether that's I did everything from trying to get projects in the door for us, like writing or responding to requests for proposals, RFPs, responding with like a pitch, to creating the budget, figuring out who'd be on the team, making sure we had the right balance of people, creating the schedule, working within like the teams to figure out what the tasks were and how we divide them into sprints, all the way through working with the publishers to say, okay, here's what we can and can't do, negotiating with them on that. And then through to, even at Imagine Engine, we wore so many different hats. So even sometimes it was like, I even like recorded some game audio last minute that we needed, that we didn't have, and, used my voice to do some sound effects. So yeah, producers usually kind of just jump in wherever they need.
So now Genevieve is known as a voice artist in the games industry.
I have an unofficial voice credit on Apples to Apples, the video game. So, yeah.
So for those that don't know, Imagine Engine, it was a developer that did a lot of licensed games for studios like THQ and other places of that ilk. So in that aspect, what game did you work on at Imagine Engine that you liked the most?
Oh, definitely Apples to Apples. Like, hands down. I used to like to claim that it was my pride and joy because it was the highest rated on Metacritic of any of our games. It was one of the only ones rated on Metacritic out of all of our games. But I think that was actually, for most people who worked on it at that studio, that was kind of our pride and joy. We were left alone a little bit more to kind of do what we wanted. There wasn't as much time pressure, which means we had 8 months as opposed to like 4 months. And we all really liked the game, so I think because it was a licensed property that we actually all really liked and cared about, everybody who worked on it put a lot of extra special touches on it. So yeah, I'm still to this day very proud of that game. Yeah.
Nice. Well, if anybody, I mean, I don't even know if you can get it.
I'm
anymore.
90% sure you cannot buy it anymore.
Yeah, I was gonna say because I know it was Xbox Live Arcade.
It was, yeah, and the THQ Kids and Family Division actually went under a week before it was supposed to launch.
Oh,
so it never got even advertised.
Okay.
So yeah, that was a little.
Did it release at retail on anything? I can't remember.
Don't think so. I think it really just got quietly put up in the Xbox store.
Yeah.
One thing we were amazed is Giant Bomb actually ended up covering it.
Yeah.
So we did get some press coverage, shockingly. And I remember watching the video, and we were all just, like, cheering in our office. Because they said a bunch of really nice things. Which there's a single-player mode in it, which makes 0 sense.
Yeah.
But we had to do it. And I remember watching the Giant Bomb review, and they're very kind about it. Like, they're like, yeah, I guess if you're a developer and you have to put in a single player, like, this is pretty okay. And we're like, yes, pretty okay!
We love being pretty okay.
We nailed it, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it was, like, really great, but it was also heartbreaking because no one even knew about it. Like, to this day, people don't know that there's an Apples to Apples digital version that you can buy.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, which is a shame. I mean, it's not really your fault that THQ went under at that. It's the drawing tablet they tried to do. But
yeah.
I can't even remember what it was called at this point.
Draw.
Yes,
I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember.
It was a great idea, but like for them to go all in and just produce so many just seemed like a bad decision.
Yeah, I mean it's hard too because that was when the whole third-party games market just collapsed, right? I mean, there used to be a time where, like, AA games were a whole market, and, our studio had a bunch of sister studios that we did kind of, like, varying levels of A-ness. 1.5 A, 2.5 A.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, and, like, we were on the lower end on ours, but there was this whole market, and then it just completely hollowed out. I mean,
it's interesting right now because a lot of that seems to be coming back.
Yeah,
because you keep seeing those digital like $30 to $40 games now coming back into vogue. Yeah, and now you have oddly enough THQ back. In there,
it's
doing those kind of games. It's
super
like
weird.
It's a cycle.
Yeah, and I think mobile had a lot to do with it. But then now you and I were talking earlier before this where you couldn't make money on mobile for a while.
Yeah.
Like, there was just
because you either priced yourself like too high, which too high was like if you're over $2, or,
exactly.
or $2 or $3.
So and then that basically priced all of these mid-tier games out of the market because people didn't expect to have to pay for games anymore. Like the average price of a game on the Apple Store was free or $1. So if you were charging even $5 for your game, you're out of luck. So
yeah. So it's weird how the industry goes sometimes.
Yeah.
But okay, so Imagine Engine, were you there at the end, or did you jump ship before the Titanic went? Were you on one of the lifeboats?
I jumped ship before the end. I wanted to. Like, I just had this idea that I wanted to continue being a producer, which ended up being wrong. Just like every other. This is a theme in my career here of thinking I knew what I wanted. So I actually ended up moving out to LA to go to grad school. And then I think maybe a year or two later, the studio had to close, which was really sad. 'Cause, I mean, the studio had been around for, I want to say, at least since the 90s. I might be wrong there, but I want to say at least 15 years the studio had been around. So maybe not the 90s, but around then. And, they had kept their doors open for that long. It was really impressive. But pretty much everybody in that market closed their
yeah,
doors.
because a lot of those licensed games just
stopped
stopped being made. Like you would see maybe a Disney one pop up here or there, but that's it.
Yeah, I mean, even Disney stopped making those games themselves, so... Yeah, they couldn't... Nobody could really survive that. So, yeah, they closed their doors about a year later, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah. So, you go back to school. Mm-hmm. At this point, why? What are you doing back in school? Like, why did you want to go back?
Yeah, I wanted to be a better producer. And at Imagine Engine... There was a couple of us producers there, but we all had maybe a year or two of experience. I mean, no one had been a producer longer than that, so there was no one to really learn from. So, yeah, I went to grad school thinking this would be a great opportunity to, like, be taught more about the process. Mm-hmm. I went to USC's Interactive Media and Game Design program, their grad program, and it ended up being a really interesting, program because I learned so much about storytelling because it's part of their cinematic school. Okay. So it's part of the film school. So we learned about interactive movies. We had to film our own movies, which was really intimidating. I took animation classes. Yeah. We did our own quote unquote coding. So we did a lot of scripting in Unity. Had to create our own games. And I have to say, like, even though the program wasn't really directed at producers, mm-hmm. Most projects required a producer. So I did a lot of that. But what was really cool is because even though I didn't know it's what I needed, I learned so much about everybody else's discipline. Yeah. So there were engineers in the program, there were designers in the program, there was theme park designers in the program, and I learned a lot from them and then from these classes that, and I think a lot of producers don't get that. They don't learn about the other crafts involved. And so even though I didn't actually end up going on to be a producer, I served occasionally at my next job as a producer in some producer capacities. And one of the things people were always really grateful about, really happy with, was when I would actually know what they did, or how hard it was when I was asking them to do something. So it's something I definitely encourage people in production to think about, is like, okay, can I take a class on animation? Can I take a class on 3D modeling? Can I try programming my own game? So I can just get a hint of, like, how hard it is to do certain things. Yeah, so
you have a little bit of understanding of what each person is going through and what they're doing.
Exactly. Yeah, and, like, you know, not that I have really any understanding of animation, really, but at least from my animation course, I knew, like, oh, okay, this is the general process of how something gets put together. I know how incredibly difficult that was for me to do. You know, I can see how it would take years and years and years to become a master of this. And, like, I know some things were easier because maybe there were, like, existing animations we could port in and then play with and mess with, versus having to build something from scratch. I mean, I don't really know what I'm talking about, but at least I have some idea.
The animation process is as difficult as you can hear about in another podcast we released with Moody.
I'm teeing up. I'm like, if you're interested in this, listen to the podcast on animation.
Yeah, you can listen to what Moody thinks about it at this point in time, because he's just learning the animation portion himself.
Exactly.
Being just an artist. Yeah. So you go to school, you learn all these extra skills, you brush up on everything that has to do with gaming, everything that has to do with storytelling. What do you do after that?
Yeah, so we were required to do an internship. And over the course of my time in the program, I got paired up before the internship with another faculty member, Dennis Wixon, who was one of the original people who started up the user research lab at Microsoft. The Games User Research program, I can't remember exactly what it's called, but at Microsoft, their program there. And so Dennis is who I learned all about user research from, which fit in really well with my background in brain and cognitive science and consulting, and also in some ways with, like, the production. And the way I usually make that link is, you know, producing is all about setting up your team for success, and that's how I thought of user research as well. It's like, what's the information the team needs to know in order to be successful with the game they're creating? So I kind of put the science background together with the game production, and we ended up taking a tour at one point in the program of Riot Games, and they had a user research discipline there. I ended up meeting David Pavlis, who was the director of research at the time, and he's like, yeah, we've got some internships open, feel free to apply. At that point, almost nobody knew what Riot Games was unless you played League actively in, like, 2012, 2013. So that's, like, you know, season 2 or 3. And so there weren't that many other people applying. So once again, I got really lucky where I think there was only a couple other candidates. So
right place, right time.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I could not have. If I'd applied a few years earlier or later, there's like no way I would have gotten.
Yeah, because I mean, pretty much like at that point in time, the only person I know that played League was Jack Steele.
Yeah, I think Jack. I didn't really know Jack at that point super well. Although I must have known him because obviously Ken and I were together. But yeah, I had only heard of League of Legends because it came up occasionally at USC because we were there in the same city.
Right. Yeah. So you get this internship. What did you do as an intern at Riot Games at that point in time?
Yeah, it was really cool. I think this is still true of Riot today. They so this was 2013, so this was a few years ago now. But their internship program, we got shirts that said "Get your own damn coffee," meaning that like interns were there to do real work. Like they weren't there to be anybody's slaves or
no gophers here.
Right? Yeah. So we would get set up with like a project that you would work on, and it would be for the full summer, and you might do some side projects too. But I was really interested in the new player experience, so that's what I did. Is I designed an experiment-ish that would look at different like circumstances that maybe new players could be introduced to the game under, and then compared their qualitative experiences between the different scenarios.
And in a way, you never playing League, was this also an experiment for yourself to get into that new player experience?
Oh yeah, because I had such a lot of people talk about this at Riot too. I mean, but just in general, like getting into a game like any MOBA, but especially League, I would say getting into it can be really intimidating and challenging. And so, yeah, it was a very personal experience, but I wanted to, kind of remove myself and like my experiences and be like, okay, what do we see from other players?
Yeah.
And what was really cool is everybody, even though I was like a nobody, I was just an intern. A lot of people at Riot got really excited by the work, and we ended up spinning up some work as a result of it. And some of that stuff is, well, I don't know how much of it's still in the game today, but some of it's still in there today about that, like, helped improve the journey for new players. So it was a really rewarding internship program for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. They must have liked your work enough, because I know you go from intern to actually working at Riot.
Exactly, yeah.
So how does that transition? Did you finish the school part?
No, I dropped out. I think I'm technically still on indefinite leave.
Yeah.
Although I think at some point you have to renew that paperwork, so I'm probably no longer on leave anymore. I loved working there. I just thought it was such a good experience, and I also was like, well, I could pay to go to school, or Riot could pay me to like learn.
Yeah.
And I really did. I was learning just so much every day. So yeah, I was again really fortunate. They offered me a full-time position, and then I stuck around there for the next 5 years. Really.
So you start at Riot. Where are you starting? What do you do?
Started from the bottom. So at that point we didn't really have that many researchers. I think we had a market research team and we had a user research team, and on the I think we were called player research, but same general idea. Yeah. There was only 3 of us, so there wasn't really a lot of like, what was I working on? Because the answer was we were all working on everything at that point. Yeah. Basically, anybody who needed research support. Although at that point in the company, like most companies that are new to research, people didn't necessarily know what research could do for them. So it was kind of hodgepodge. And actually, like Carl, who was on the show earlier, Carl was one of the people who actually really got it, and would know what to ask for. But for the most part, we kind of were, writing surveys, running player tests. So that's where we bring people in and have them play the game and ask them questions. That was the bulk of that work at that point was, we would release a feature and we'd survey players about how they felt about it, or we would be in the process of developing a feature and we'd bring players in and have them play the feature before it went live.
So when you brought players in, did you bring players that already played the game, or did you actually bring in new players as well?
Typically we brought in players who already played the game, because that's who the features were being developed for the most part.
Yeah, that makes sense.
With the exception of, like, I did continue a lot of the work I was doing around the new player experience. So for that, we would try to bring in people who were likely to be League of Legends players but weren't. Yeah. And had like similar experiences to League players, so that they they weren't like playing completely different games, so that they would have like kind of the same set of background experiences. But yeah, for the most part, most of our work, pretty much the whole time I was at Riot, was working with current League of Legends players.
Okay. So you're working on research. You're getting that research to the team. They're developing new stuff.
Yeah.
Do you do that the whole time you're at Riot?
Yeah, I mean, the nature of how I did research changed over time, and who I did it for. So in those early days, there was no like a specific assignment to any team. It was just, we were more like a centralized service, and people would come to us with asks, and we would fulfill them. And so early on, I worked a lot with like the skins development team, the cosmetic content for League, and so I did a lot of their work. But then once our team grew, I mean, by the time I left Riot, the team included both market research, user research, and analysts. And analysts worked more with like the in-game data, the telemetry or metrics data. And we were all one big team, and there was 40 of us, I think, but when I left. Yeah, so it was
like from 3 to 40.
3 to 40, yeah, it was quite a growth.
A 5-year span.
Yeah, and we had all been independent teams, and we came together. And when I left Riot, we all we were assigned embedded is the word we use. We were embedded into specific teams, so you're really part of a product team.
I see.
Like you sat with them, you went to their meetings, you were part of development decisions in the way that any other team member would. And that was really cool. I think that was a really positive transition over time. And it really allowed us to like understand what the team was trying to do, and for them to understand what we did and work together. But yeah, so in those early days, it was mostly like writing surveys, typically like trying to get a sense of how players felt about something after it was released, and maybe bringing them in and having them play something. Towards the end, I was working on R&D in development games, and more what I was doing was kind of looking ahead to the future, right? So like, what are the types of things that gamers are looking for in their games, right? So there's a lot more abstract, thinking about what are the holes in the market? What is something that isn't being served today, but that we can tell that gamers really want? Or something else that I worked on towards the end was the actual like around game entertainment experience. Yeah. So Riot makes comic books, they make music videos, they make now they make holograms. That wasn't that didn't happen when I was there, but now they do.
Oh, you missed out on the hologram.
I did. I'm kind of sad about that one. But yeah, I did a lot of research around like what the IP should be and how we should deliver it. So how did people want to interact with the characters of League, the world of League of Legends? Like what was important there? How would we deliver it? So I moved much more from the what we call like tactical research of, like what are we making today, to the strategic research side of what could we be doing in the future, and how broadly are we going to get there?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I've seen they've done like a lot of comics and stuff outside, because I'm a big comic book person. So and I'm always like, that's an interesting way to go. But a lot of games do comics and stuff, so it's definitely not something I expected, but I mean, it makes sense. Yeah. Because there's a lot of crossover.
It was always interesting to see how people reacted to that, because I when I would tell people when I was working with that team outside of Riot that that's what I was doing, they'd be like, what? I'm like, right, we make music videos and comic books and short movies, really. And then I'd show them, and one of our biggest fans was my mom. She loved watching them, and even like I got to work on documentaries as part of that. I mean, I wasn't making the documentaries, but I was helping the team think through like, okay, like what is it that players are really hoping to see, and then once they would finish like the rough cut, we'd put it in front of players to see if it was having the impact that they wanted it to have. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. So you were there for 5 years, and then you just leave.
I did, yes. Out.
You just leave. So you left because you decided to go to another tech company.
Right, yeah. And a big part of it was actually, for Kent and I mean, a big part of it was Winterborn, actually. Yeah. We've always wanted to, we were not huge fans of Los Angeles.
Yes.
So we had always kind of planned our exit strategy was going to be to move to Seattle. The timing was pretty good. We didn't have any kids yet. And
I know kind of just paid off his loans.
He had paid off his loans, right? And, we had some savings, and we're like, he'd always, the whole time in our relationship, he'd talked about wanting to make this game with you guys. And, and I've played, of course, the tabletop game, so I get it. And I was like, you know what? Like, let's do it now, because there's never going to be a better time. Yeah. And it didn't really, not living in LA, it didn't make sense to stay at Riot. So the decision to move to Seattle came first, and then, I found tech companies up there that were looking for user researchers. And then that's been kind of life since then. Moved up to Seattle, started doing user research for tech, and Kent started Winterborn.
He did. So we'll get into... I'll get in more of that when we have Kent.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We're going to do another podcast with you and Kent, and we'll talk about the Winterborn part and how you're dealing with that. But for this, like, if you were now working for an independent game studio, how do you feel an independent game studio could benefit from the stuff that you do, the user research?
Yeah.
And how do you think it could be implemented?
Yeah, I do think about this.
Tell me what you should do.
I think about this a lot, especially because I think about Winterborn, but also I have a lot of friends who have, actually a lot of friends from Riot who've gone and started their own game companies.
And we've talked to
a bunch of them. Games. And I think what's challenging is, like, I don't expect most indie studios to be able to, like, especially early on, afford a full-time researcher. But that being said, I think what a lot of companies don't realize is it's almost like you can't this is so cheesy, but you can't afford not to have some amount of that thinking as part of your studio. What research can do for indie studios is really, if you're seeking funding, I think it's so important to have an understanding of the market. So, like, Winterborn did not go that route, so it wasn't as critical to have to, like, make a case for the game.
Right.
But if you're seeking investors or trying to go after publishers, make deals with distributors, you need to have a case for why your game is going to be special. And I think in that case, using research thinking, even if you don't have a dedicated research, by being able to look at the market, identify the gaps, interview players who play that genre. There's things like Steam Spy isn't as quite as robust as it used to be, but that used to be a place where you could go and for free see what
the market's doing.
Exactly, see how many people were playing and had purchased a game. App Annie is another one that's for mobile. So knowing how to read that data and be like, okay, there's clearly something here. And then being able to pair that with either user interviews or surveys to be like, look, we've noticed this big insight about players today. And even if you don't have a dedicated researcher, I mean, conducting interviews, there's all sorts of great resources out there for, especially if you have a designer on your team. Designers a lot of times can hybridize and do some really basic research as part of their job, if that's something they're interested in. And there's a lot of great resources out there for designers who want to get into that, or product managers who want to get into it, to be able to conduct, like, unbiased, good interviews. And then running surveys is a little bit more challenging, but typically, for an indie studio, they don't need to be quite as scientific or rigorous as a larger studio. That is something that if you have an existing gaming community who's pretty close to the genre or there you want to go,
right?
You could have people take a survey, especially if you want to incentivize them to make it a little bit more. I don't know if it might make it more biased, it might make it less biased,
right? But
depending on the community, you can launch surveys through there and get a sense of that. So I think that that's where a lot of the early support that researchers can bring is really making sure you understand the market. And then later on, once you actually have a game, knowing how to play test the game is really critical, because it's not the same as QA testing,
right?
Just about looking for bugs, and it's not the same as just your own team playing through. And you guys have alluded to before, like, Moody brings this really great perspective as somebody who didn't play the tabletop game, right? So he's like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. Right? In that same way, like, once you guys have a truly playable game, you're going to put it in front of people who have never seen the game before, and they're going to be like,
I don't know what's going on.
I don't know what this means. They're going to break it in ways you don't expect. So having somebody who has a bit of experience running playtests can be really valuable as well.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Genevieve, I want to say thank you.
Thank you.
For telling us about all your time in researching games. And do you want people to find you?
Yeah, they can find me. I mean, I don't talk as much about games anymore.
Well,
so.
I know you've started a blog.
I do. I have a blog around. Actually, yeah, that'll be. I'll be happy to plug that. That's a little bit more on topic.
Yeah.
Yeah, my blog is about using strategy in tech. So using data and strategy and strategic thinking in the tech industry.
What is the blog?
It is called tiny-data.tech.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tiny-data.tech. Do you want them to find? If they had questions for you?
Yes.
Can they do it through the website, or do you?
Let's do website. I would say my Twitter's just like mostly shit posting, so I feel like.
I think you're a quality Twitter follow, but you know.
All right, yeah. If you want to find me on Twitter, go for it. My handle is Miss__aligned, so it's a little hard to find, but
double underscores
because I think Miss_aligned had already been taken. So
Miss_aligned, the only one underscore. If you are listening, please change it.
Hand over that title.
We need that right now.
It's critical branding.
The double underscore is just
it's not working
too much for the audience.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you
for being on. You will be on a future episode. I know it because we recorded soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Trevor.